All right, so in this video, we're going to take a look at Unity Bolt, and basically you just want to take a look at some of the basics of how Bolt works and how to add macros and flow graphs and everything to your object. And just in case you've never used Bolt before, I just wanted to basically do this particular video just to kind of get you familiarized with it. Okay, so basically I have two cubes here. The first cube is the one we're going to be working with, and this particular cube, my goal is to make this cube rotate. Okay, now in order to make this cube rotate, I needed to take an input, or I needed to know to take an input, and the only way to actually get it to know that is to add a component onto it that allows me to do that. So Bolt allows you to do that by adding what they call a flow machine to the object. Okay, now if you have your scene open and you have a cube in your scene and you have Bolt and everything ready to go, just go to add component and type in the word flow, and you'll be able to add flow machine. And when you click on that, you're going to get this. The only thing you're not going to get, of course, is a macro. It's going to be completely empty, so I'm going to remove mine for now, but yours will look just like this. And so this is the flow machine component that's going to hold on your macro. Basically, it's going to hold the information that is going to allow us to rotate this cube when we hit the D key or the arrow key on the keyboard. Okay. All right, so in terms of your different macros, the first thing you might want to do is, for organizational purposes, is to create some folders. So here in the project area here, under assets, you can go ahead and create something like called My Macros, and then within that you can create a flow macro folder. And if you want, go ahead and create a state macro folder. So in my flow macro folder, I have something called test macro. Now, in order to create a macro, you want to go ahead and right click in this area, go to create, go to Bolt, and then you click on flow macro. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click it, and as you can see, it creates a new flow macro. Now, of course, you can click that and rename it whatever you want. And this is the area here you're going to put all your logic. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this for now, but you can leave yours open because generally I'm just going to be using the one I already created here. Okay, and now this here is going to be all the content or the units that you're going to need in order to rotate this cube on the y-axis. Okay, and these are called units. These little individual things here. Now you can select them, you can move them, that sort of thing. But you're probably wondering, if you haven't used Bolt before, how do you create a unit? All right, so the first thing I want you guys to do is just go ahead and double click in this gray area. By double clicking in this gray area, it's going to basically give you a full screen view, and it makes it a lot easier to work with. Now I'm not going to go over all of these different things just yet. Probably the things I'm going to cover more so is probably just the variables. But in terms of control inputs and value inputs and that sort of thing, this particular course isn't going to cover that. We're just going to keep this super basic, super easy, just to get a grasp on how to use Bolt. Okay. So again, this is the area for creating your logic. Okay. Now in this area, you can right click. And when you right click, they have this little finder here. I think they call it the fuzzy finder. And what this means is that here you can find all types of things you're going to need to be able to create your code or to create your logic. Okay. Now I'm going to double click. Now let's rethink what we want to do here. So we have a cube in our scene. We have our component, and it's ready to take on a new macro so that we can rotate our cube. All right, now you may not have any logic yet, but what we want to do is add this macro to our component. So you can do this by taking this, clicking and dragging it, and putting it in here that way, or you can search for it using it this way as well. Okay, But I usually click and drag if I can, if I could just easily drag it. Sometimes I'll search, but in this case, we can just drag it. Okay. All right. So now that you have that, when you click on an object, it's going to automatically pull up the graph that's associated with it. Now, if you have multiple flow machines assigned to one object, you're going to have to actually select edit graph in order to do that. Okay. But in this case, that's not the situation. All right. So our next goal is really to make this cube move. Now let's go ahead and show you basically what we're doing. I'm going to hit play. And as it loads up, all right, so I'm going to hit the D key. And basically every time I hit the D key, it's very simple. It's just rotating object. Nothing spectacular, just to show you just kind of how it works. Okay. And what's great about Bolt is that even though it's in play mode, I can still edit this, right? I can still move things around. I can still disconnect things, and I'll show you how all that works now. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get out of play mode. So let's recreate this, okay? All right, so I'm going to double click in this gray area. Now, in your space, you're not going to have this, so I just want you to follow along with me here, okay? So in order to get an update event, this is an update event. And if you're not familiar with coding, basically an update event tells this code to run every frame. Okay. So we're going to right click and we're going to click add unit. Now we're going to type in update and it's going to search. And this is pretty much anything related to the word update. But all we need is this here. Okay, so you would click update. Now, if you didn't want to type it in, I'm going to click the same thing and search for update, and that's going to be under events. So we click events, lifecycle, and it's going to be here under update that way. And you can have multiple updates if you needed to, but in this case, we only need one. So I'm going to right click and hit delete. All right. So the next thing we want to do, remember, we want to rotate the cube, right? Super simple. So, but we want to rotate the cube if we actually hit a button on the keyboard, right? So to do that, we need an if statement, and this branch is what an if statement is. So to do that, of course, is right click, type in branch. That's not branch, branch. And then you click and you do that. Now to connect these different units, you can just basically hover your mouse over this arrow, click and drag. And generally, anything that you can connect it to will be basically highlighted like that. As you can see, everything else is dimmed out. Okay. Great, perfect. Now, as you can see, the color orange here, and it's basically, we can click on this object, and if you go over to your flow graph inspector here on the left side, and if you pull this down, it's going to say a condition is missing. And basically, the condition is, it's basically saying, well, if what? Well, if what? You need a condition. And that's what we're going to do now. So we need to know if the input is greater than 0. Then we want it to do something, right? So in this case, we need to take in an input. So let's go ahead and add that. So we're going to right click, add unit, type in input. Now there's going to be all types of different inputs. Now keep in mind, when you see this input, look to the right here. It's going to be arrow. That's going to give you even more options. So we're going to click input. And we need to get input, get axis. So we're going to get down and we're going to get the axis name. So go ahead and click on that. All right. So now that we have the axis name, we want to get the horizontal. Okay, so what you want to do is type in horizontal. Okay. Now you're probably wondering, why is this grayed out? It's because there's nothing connected to it. It's not part of the flow. Now, if for any reason you do want everything to be highlighted, even if it's not part of the flow, you can go up to the right here and you can actually select dim. But I tend to like it to be dim because it just kind of gives me a visual indication of what's connected and what's not. All right, so we want to take in this input. Now you're probably wondering, like, where is this input coming from? Well, I'm going to double click on this gray space to bring this down, and I'm going to go to, where is it at? We're going to go to project settings. And then over here on the right side, project settings, we're going to have our input here. I'm going to click on input and drop this down. Now here, horizontal is what I'm using. Let me bring this out here. So we're using horizontal for our input, okay? And basically, if you type in this word inside of here, it's going to give us that horizontal input. And basically, if we hit the D key or the A key, the left or the right, that's going to get an input here, okay? All right, perfect. And so we're going to leave that the way that is, because that's pretty much defaulted in any Unity project. But if you don't have it, you can basically duplicate this by just watching. Just basically make your settings look just like that. Okay. All right, cool. So I'm just going to go back to my inspector. All right, and I'm going to double click back in the gray area. All right. And so now what we want to do is put the input. Now we need it to be greater than something here. So what we want to do is right click, or we can actually click this, drag it and let go. And it's going to give us some conditions here. Okay. And so what we want is greater than. Okay. And it's still looking for a condition because we need to take in a couple different values. So what we want to do is do multiply. Now, the reason we're doing this is really so that we can get delta time. Generally, delta time is used so that your rotation in the speed is not necessarily based on the system, but it's based on actual time. So no matter how high, I guess, the resolution is or your graphics card is, it's going to rotate and move at the same speed regardless. Okay, so that's why we're using the time get delta time. And so to do that, I'm going to get multiply here. So I'm going to right click, add unit. We're going to do multiply. And we're going to do multiply in math/generic. So we're going to do that. And we're going to take this node here, and we're going to take it and drag it here. Okay. And then next, what we're going to do is take the horizontal, put that there. And then we're going to look for time get delta time. We're going to add unit, and we're going to type in time delta time. And there it is there. Okay. And we're going to take this and drag it there, just like so. All right. So far we have our if statement. So basically every frame, if this input is greater than 0, we need it to do something. But what do we want it to do? Well, what I'm going to first do is turn off this. So I'm going to right click. And when you right click on any particular connection, it's going to basically disconnect that, right? So we don't technically, if you want to get rid of something and reconnect it, you can do so by doing that. Okay, it's pretty simple there. But I don't need two doing the same thing. So in my case, I'm going to get rid of those. But we needed to do something, right? So in this case, if I were to push play, let's see what happens. I'm going to double click in the gray area. And remember, this cube has a flow machine on it, and it has a test macro, which is what we're in right now, this macro. And it's supposed to take on this input and do something. Let's see what actually happens if we do it right now. Okay, so what you see here is we have a flow. Okay, this is completely live. The update is going, this is going every frame, It's checking if this input is detected. And if it's greater than 0, right now it's not because it's at 0, so it's equal, but it's false. Now if I click in this area, if I hit the D key, you can see that it's now 1, and 1 of course is greater than 0. Okay, but really it's 0.02 because it's multiplying by delta time. So 1 multiplied by 0.02 is 0.02. So it's greater than 0. Okay, so that makes it true. Okay, so it's not doing anything right now. But what we want to do is also show you that you can work live as well. So for now, I'm going to do something. I'm going to put a debug message in this area. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to type in debug and I'm going to do log message. Okay. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to take the true and connect it to this here. Now this is waiting for a message. So in order to put a message in here, we're going to take this and click and drag, and I'm going to put a string literal here. Okay, so in this string, if you're not familiar with coding, a string is a set of text that we can use, right? So I'm going to go ahead and type in key pressed. Perfect. All right, so now we did this live while Unity is working, right? While it's in play mode. I'm going to hit the D key. Let's see if the log message ends up here in the bottom left corner. Key pressed. So it now recognizes that the key was pressed. Okay, perfect. And that's what we wanted. So what I'm going to do is now add the transform rotate option here. And so what I want to do is we can either keep this here. So I'm going to right click, type in transform, and we have multiple different types of transforms here. We have the transform rotate on Eulers. I'm just going to click on this one just to show you that we have multiple transform options here. Click that, and then you're going to have multiple ones here. So which one is it? We can look down. And do we see it here? We can transform rotate Eulers. So I'm going to click that. And I'm going to connect the flow. So let's see what happens. Okay. So anything that's true, it should execute anything after this point. Okay. So I'm going to change the Eulers here to -5. And now let's see if it rotates our cube. I'm going to click and I'm going to hit the D key. And there you have it. As you can see, everything here is working properly. When we hit the arrow key, it takes in this input. It's checking every frame because it's on update. It's checking every frame for this input. And when I do the input, it's going through the flow. Right now it's false. As soon as it's true, it's going to execute these things here. Okay. And now that we've created all this, I'm just going to go ahead and select all of this information here, and I'm going to hit the delete key because we don't need it. And that's pretty much it. So I've basically created a very quick code that allows us to rotate our cube. Perfect. All right. And that's just some basics of using Bolt. I just wanted to kind of start off at very basics of just kind of adding some units into your graph and basically understanding how the flow graph communicates with the flow machine, and then the flow machine is on your object. Now there is another thing here under source. If you click macro, and it's called embed, and generally that's the same thing, but it's embedded directly into the object, and you don't necessarily need a a separate macro here. So that would be embedded directly. And I don't particularly use those all the time. I'm sure they come in handy in certain situations, but in this case, I typically just create a macro and add it, because what that allows you to do is add it to multiple objects. So if you, for instance, have another cube, let's go ahead and add a cube to our scene. I'm going to 3D object, add a cube, and say we want this cube to also rotate. So I'm going to select this cube. I'm going to go to add component, flow machine, and we want this cube to move basically just like this one. So I'm going to add this macro here, and it's using the same macro as cube 1 is. Okay, so both of these are using the same macro. So if, for instance, I hit play, and I hit the D key, both of these are going to rotate. Okay, so the reason, again, I showed you that is because if we originally had created all of this logic and code on the embedded version of this, then it would only be used on that one object, and we wouldn't be able to reuse this logic on any other objects. So just keep that in mind if you decide to use embedded. All right. All right, perfect. I hope that makes sense. I know that's super simple, and this isn't for those who are already used to Bolt. This is really for those who are trying to kind of just get their feet wet with it and just kind of get used to it. And so in the next video, we're going to kind of talk about states and how states work. All right.